Has anyone ever hired a homeless person who had a will work sign? How did that go? I had a guy paint a house for some sandwiches. He pooped in the backyard. Short and sweet. I did once. I needed help in digging a ditch for a water line and help installing the pipe and refilling the ditch. The guy was an illegal immigrant from Mexico. His English wasn't really good, but he worked really hard and seemed to want to do a good job. I paid him $10 an hour and bought him lunch and supper. We also shared a 18-pack of beer as it was really hot that day in the desert. My grandfather used to do this. It was back in the 80s and early 90s. But the stories are probably still true to time. He hired a lot of people who were in between homes over the course of his career. He was a construction contractor, and the majority of the people worked well for whatever amount of time they said they would. Every so often, he would find an individual who had excellent work ethic and would ask them if they wanted a full-time job. Most accepted, and most who were asked were former members of the military. This is where it gets sad. You should understand that just because someone is given a job and the ability to get back on their feet, the ailment which caused them to be homeless is usually still there. Because the majority of the people that my grandpa hired full-time were vets. The ailments were usually mental health issues like PTSD and drug abuse, problems spurring from injuries at war, or a combination of both. Of the 12 people that my granddad hired full-time, 11 were vets. The one guy who was not found a better paying, less physically demanding job within a year thanked my grandpa for his assistance, and he eventually lost contact. 4 of the vets that he hired killed themselves within a year of employment. 1 man died on the job from a problem related to his drug use. I know that 3 of the remaining vets eventually found help and went on to find better work. 1 of them remained in contact with my grandpa until my grandpa's death. The rest I don't know what happened to it. So I guess the moral of the story is that society can really suck, especially when it comes to taking care of those who need it most. He cleaned my backyard, so I made him lunch and $10. He was a nice fella. I worked in a furniture store that was across the street from the Greyhound bus terminal. We'd occasionally get people drifting and looking for work. One that stands out was a guy who came in early one morning saying that he'd missed his connecting bus and had to wait until evening to get the next one. He said that he was hungry and would work for a hot breakfast. My boss put him to work washing our delivery trucks, and when he got close to finished, sent someone to a local restaurant and got him a fairly nice taquilla at breakfast. When the breakfast was given to him, he angrily demanded cash. The boss told him that he'd agreed to work for breakfast, and that's what he was getting. The guy stormed out. Sans breakfast. We later learned that he had cut up the garden hose that we'd given him to wash the trucks. The same boss once hired a drifter to rake the leaves in his yard. The guy didn't rake the leaves and ran off with the rake. I've often chuckled at the thought of him trying to pawn the rake. My mom hired a guy to weed our flower beds in the front yard in exchange for a bus ticket home. He actually did a really good job. Then a few weeks later he called her saying crazy things over the phone like people were after him, etc. Turns out he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Probably explains the homelessness. I gave a guy a plate of corn muffins to paint my chicken coop. He never did. I hired someone to clean my house. I paid up front. Then I saw a car pick them up and drive away. That was a waste of $15. I'm from northern Canada, and one day my mom came home with a homeless guy in the passenger seat. He had been outside our local grocery store with a sign saying, "Will work for money. Need to get down south for the winter. Basically if you live outside here during the winter, you'll die. No question about it. It gets as cold as -45 some days." Anyway, the guy honestly was cool as duck and my rents paid him $20 an hour. They're wealthy to pick up dog shit in our backyard, paint our fence, and mow our lawn. He had awesome work ethic and was extremely thankful for the money. I paid a guy $20 to pretend to be my dad for a part-time teacher conference. He asked the principal where the bathroom was and never came back. Turns out he owed it in the woman's bathroom. Not sure if it totally applies, but I worked at a restaurant where the owner hired a homeless man to wash the dishes. I thought it was cool of him. Until the dishwasher started hitting on me, making sexual remarks, and once cornered me in the stockroom. Needless to say, he wasn't hired there for very long. I volunteer at a non-profit that recruits homeless from the streets to do somewhat tedious work. Whether or not it is a good or bad experience greatly depends on their personal situation. Substance abuse, for example, is a huge factor. They have to be honest about it going in. Otherwise it usually falls apart. Last week a man lied about his alcohol addiction and went into DTs about 12 hours into coming in. If he'd let us know, he would have received medical attention prior to being placed in a job setting. Then sometimes, people just aren't grateful for an opportunity at all. They complain, they don't like the food, the work is too difficult, no one is listening to them, etc. But the food is fine, work is medial, and there are always counselors on hand. Stealing is also a big problem. I will say the majority are very excited to have a chance to work. They're eager and kind, and I would trust them as much as you can trust anyone else suffering from mental illness or addiction. It's just a matter of being realistic and cautious, but still maintaining a love for another person unlike yourself. If they really wanted work, they'd be hanging around in the Home Depot parking lot with the Mexicans. People hire them all the time. They don't want to work. They just want to show that they are willing to work, so you'll give them money. There was a homeless guy who was always asking for money outside a nightclub we used to frequent. He was always really nice and friendly, and we often gave him $1 or $2 when we saw him. A friend of mine was good friends with the manager at a local Denny's and offered to put in a good word for our homeless friend if he was interested in a job. He was so thankful for the offer and actually applied for and got the job. We all felt so good that we helped someone get back on their feet. 2 weeks later though, he was back outside the nightclub begging again. All smiles and friendly as always. It turns out he was a good worker until his first paycheck, which he then proceeded to spend on a drug and alcohol binge, causing him to get fired the next day when he showed up to work drunk and belligerent. Guess we found out why he never could hold down a job. My teacher told me about this homeless guy somewhere who had this sign on election day, I believe to get into the state House of Reps, with his name on it saying to vote for him. He was apparently elected and went from carrying his stuff in a cart and living in a box to a $90K/year salary. If it isn't real, it makes one very funny story. She also said he served 1 term and within a year was back in his old life living in boxes pushing his stuff with a cart. Edit. For clarification, I meant a year out of office. I gave it a shot once, trying to be kind and help someone out. The surgery was not successful, and apparently sleeping under a bridge doesn't actually qualify you as orthopedic surgeon. Who knew? Yes, I have. He is a guy that drifts around the poorer sections of town. I see him a lot, and he has an addiction problem. He is a nice guy though, and he will rake my yard or shovel my walk for me. He does a good job and I pay him, or he also likes to take my cans for payment. I have never had it go badly, but they will show up all the time if you give them too many jobs. I have also had them show up at my house with obviously stolen goods to sell, which I have to politely refuse. I tried to hire a woman for sandwiches and money if she did okay/made an effort to paint my paintball field staging area. Some lady saw this and bought her groceries and gave me a dirty look. I think she thought I was a pervert. My dad came home with a homeless man to help him move some mattresses. A grimy, fairly young, lean hairy guy was at my house for almost an hour and got paid $40. He was happy to work for money, and he didn't seem too crazy or anything. My dad left him by a gas station afterwards and watched him buy beer with the money he had just made. Honestly, I was a little attracted to him. Something about being dirty and poor and capable of carrying heavy things. When I worked at a KFC, we would often catch homeless people picking through our trash. I would always usually offer them some menial job in exchange for food. Stuff like picking up the trash in the parking lot or picking the weeds out of the sidewalk. It usually worked out to me giving them about $10-20 in food for an easy job that took them less than an hour to complete. I was surprised by how many people declined. It went really well. This guy had a sign I hired him to pull weeds at a house where I was staying for a week as a thank you to the host. I ended up staying another week, and the guy came by and he had a lawnmower. I hired him to mow the lawn. I stay another week and he comes by with a lawnmower and pruning shears. So I hire him to mow the lawn, pull the weeds, and prune the shrubs. I hire him for another week and he comes by with a bicycle with a lawnmower tied to it and pruning shears and a lawn edger. Pretty soon, the guy had a tool trailer for his bike. It turned out he just hit a bad patch and had pawned all his tools. He was a homeless veteran and I helped get him on his feet. After 6 weeks of freeloading off my friend and hiring the homeless guy to make me look good, I got busted. The homeless guy explained the story to my friend and friend hired him for many other jobs. Friend totally forgave me since I was cleaning up his house too, and homeless guy got a house. We are all pretty content and went on to have generally content lives. When we moved stuff from storage, there was a group of shady looking guys who would hang around the storage unit to offer their moving services. We paid one guy to help us load a moving truck. Then he came with us to help move all our stuff into a new apartment. Good thing too, that guy must have been a master at Tetris. He reorganized the stuff we'd already put in the truck, so we had more room and only had to make one trip. There was a little paranoia in the back of my mind as he looked around saying how nice a new place was, and he got a good look at its layout, as well as all the expensive stuff we moved in. He was pretty friendly, talked about odd jobs he went around the city looking for and some of the things he'd experienced on the street. We bought him lunch and sent him off with his pay, maybe $60 for a couple hours of work. Can't remember. Never saw him again or had any trouble. So it was a good experience overall. My father built houses for a living, and one day one of his employees picked up a homeless guy who wanted to work. The guy said he really needed to get something to eat before they work. So he hopped into the bed of his truck and they went through Bojangles drive-thru. After getting breakfast, the homeless guy jumped out of the bed of the truck at the next red light and ran for it. We all proceeded to laugh heartily, and that's the story. Guess he just wanted a biscuit. I thought she was a hooker. Turns out he was a hooker. There was a woman who had been hanging around my neighborhood for about a week. I always saw her sitting in front of a coffee shop not buying anything. So I struck up a conversation as I usually do with people I see around regularly. She started telling me her story, and I was like, whoa, hold on. I'm hungry, let me buy you lunch, and we can talk about the whole thing. So over some chicken wings we talked about how her ex-boyfriend had stole her money and then dumped her in an unfamiliar city, and she was trying to find some work so she could afford a place with a friend of her mother's who lived nearby. So I told her my apartment was a mess and I'd pay her to tidy up. 2 hours later my apartment was spotless, and she even made me a sandwich. Fuck, I would have wifed that girl. Paid 2 homeless guys with McDonald's, 1 Big Mac and fries between the 2 of them, outside a gardening center, to fill the back of the work truck up with bark. Was actually my lunch, and had no cash, but they said they would do it for food, so gave them that, and bought myself another on the way home. My dad does it to get help rehabbing houses. He does this in an area where there is a huge homeless population, many of them with good to excellent construction skills. Some guys are so good at something, he'd go looking for a particular guy for a particular type of work. Closed bracket. If it is a multi-day job, he pays at the end of the job, not the end of the day. Often, guys go on a bender after getting paid, and you don't see them again for a while. These guys usually don't have will work signs on a random corner though. They hang out by the home improvement store, and 1 or 2 of them might have a sign. So they really are looking for work, not pretending to. It was midnight, and I was waiting for a bus. I was starving, but I didn't want to go to the McDonald's across the street in case the bus came, and I missed it. A homeless woman approached me and told me a story about how she was pregnant and starving, etc. So I gave her like $7 and told her to go to McDonald's and buy whatever she wanted, but to bring me 2 McDoubles. She never showed. I figured she wouldn't, but I thought it would have been touching if she had, which is why I did it. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.